You're listening to Storytime in Paris on Paris Underground Radio. For more great content and to join our book club, please join us on Patreon. Since well before Victor Hugo looked up at Notre Dame and thought, what if a hunchback lived in there? Authors have been inspired by Paris. Welcome to the Storytime in Paris podcast on Paris Underground Radio, where we keep that tradition alive by showcasing an author with a French connection in each episode. Every episode will feature 5 questions asked by you, our author's biggest fans, and answered live on air. Then our authors will treat us to a reading of an excerpt from their book. I'm your host, Jennifer Garrity. Would you like to join the Storytime in Paris book club? Head on over to patreon.com/Paris Underground Radio and stay tuned to the end of this episode for more information. What would you do if you received a text message saying the person you love most in the world is in danger, and the only way to save them is to play the game? You can tell no one, and worse yet, there will only be one survivor. My guest this week is author Scott Kershaw, and his debut novel, The Game, is a psychological thriller, mystery, suspense, and horror novel all rolled into one. Curious to meet the man behind The Game? Please allow me to introduce Scott Kershaw, author of The Game. Hello, Scott. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Jen. Thanks for having me on.
Can you start by telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I am a writer from the north of England, from a tiny little town called Grimsby, which is in the middle of nowhere.
I can hear birds chirping.
Yeah, so I'm kind of lying. I've actually just left Grimsby and now I'm living like in the countryside outside of it. So yeah, the birds are just attacking my house constantly. It's an absolute nightmare. But yeah, and that's about it. There's not much else going on really.
Well, can you tell us, that's not true. Tell us about The Game. You have a book that just came out. Tell us a little bit about the book, if you will, please.
Oh yeah, I do have a book that came out. Yeah, so The Game is my own debut novel, and it follows these 5 characters from around the world who in one day all have a loved one abducted, and then they are basically forced into more and more unpleasant situations to save the life of their loved one, and only one of them can presumably survive, and that's it.
Yeah, succinct and terrifying.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, that's what I like to describe myself as. So,
oh, fabulous.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, do you have a connection to France?
No, not a personal one. I visited Paris just before writing it. Yeah, so that's kind of why I wanted to set one of my characters there. So I chose like 5 places around the world, and I guess I wanted to take a couple of those places that are like really famously beautiful places. So I chose New York and Paris, but show kind of the underside of it, like the working class side, the immigrant side, and just the struggles that you don't really see in the usual. Because that's kind of the Paris that we saw. When we went there, we didn't have a lot of money, so we like traveled around, just going round and round on the metro, and we saw all these, just a very different side of Paris that I thought was really interesting. And yeah, I guess I just kind of wanted to explore that a bit more and take someone from there and give them hell.
That's part of what drew me to this book in the first place, because as a host for a podcast about Paris, there's a lot of books that are either about like how beautiful and romantic and whimsical Paris is, or about like Nazi occupation. So
Yeah.
It's nice to have one that's set contemporarily and not necessarily looking at the shiny exterior. I appreciated that.
Yeah, that's it. It was literally just my experience of Paris. We had like a couple of really gorgeous days there, but yeah, generally because we didn't have a lot of money at the time and stuff, that was the Paris that we saw, and we were like, wow, yeah, you don't really see a lot of this Paris represented. And because I'm from a very working class community, which is Grimsby's really like, well, very working class. Yeah, I kind of wanted that. I wanted to show that people, even in these amazing places, there's just regular people trying to get by everywhere, and sometimes it's hard, but yeah.
Yeah. So I have collected some questions to ask you.
All right.
So the first one is, there's so much that happens in this book. There are twists and turns and mysteries to unravel. I'm really curious about what sparked the idea for the book. Was it like an idea or a sound or a fear or what? How did you start?
Um, I guess I kind of grew up in the era of like, all the they were called torture porn films, so like Saw and Hostel and stuff. And I always kind of, the focus is very much on the machines and the traps in those. And I always wanted to just strip that back and be like, okay, I'd like to write a book where, the traps are essentially just the lies that these characters tell. Like there is no giant blender waiting to shove them in or anything. I guess there was that, and lockdown happened, and all these people around the world were suddenly. It was a strange thing because everyone was trapped in their homes, and yet the world kind of got smaller as well because everyone went online. You could, if you were so inclined, you could just ruin someone's life from the other side of the planet.
Mm.
Yeah, and I was just thinking about those things, and I guess that's it. That's kind of where it came from originally.
I wondered if the pandemic played a role in it because the book, there's no pandemic in the book and they're able to move around freely, but there is a sense of claustrophobia.
Yeah, and I mean, it was literally written during the lockdown, so it started, yeah, pretty much the first week of lockdown was when I started writing it.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah, the whole thing was written just trapped in my house going crazy.
Did you know how it would end when you started?
I don't know. I can't remember. I actually can't. It's been a weird couple of years. Yeah, I think I had a rough idea. Yeah, it's hard to say without giving it away, but
Yeah.
I think I very much wanted the whole thing. Like the book is about having consent stripped away from you. That's like the central thing, and like I say, it's very easy to do that these days. Like we project images of ourselves on the internet, and I wanted that idea of taking someone's consent away, but making it a physical thing. Like so, that's what the whole book is, and then by the end, that is very much what the book's about. And yeah, so I guess I knew where I wanted it to go roughly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. So you knew sort of A and Z, but not exactly how to get from one to the other.
Yeah, that's it.
So the idea of having to play a game that you don't know the rules to save someone you love is terrifying, but also really compelling. And I think you touched on this a little bit, but we as a people seem really fascinated by these dark sides of life, like serial killers, these horror films that you were mentioning, true crime podcasts. You look at the popularity of Squid Game, and there's something that draws us to that. What do you think it is that compels us as a people to look at these sorts of things?
Oh, that is a deep, deep question. I don't know. There's something really wrong with us as a race, I think, as a species. Like, we, the whole appeal of horror in general has always been it's like anything, it's like a ride. You like to be scared a bit. Like, you like to be scared a bit, but then actually not be in danger. And
Hmm.
I think that's it. And I think, yeah, like at the minute, it's really exploding like true crime documentaries and stuff. And it's almost it's getting to a point where it's like, how dark can Netflix find a true crime story? Like, it's almost like they're looking back over the last 100 years and being like, find the most awful stuff you can find and we'll make a 20-part documentary on it. And people will lap it up. And I guess, again, that kind of goes to what the book's about. Like, it's very much the game is played on the characters, but I also wanted to play it on the readers. Like, to be a reader of a thriller or a horror, you are putting the characters through things. You're enjoying it. Like, you don't watch a slasher film. If there was no death in a slasher film, you'd be like, well, that was not a slasher film. Like, it wasn't worth watching. And yeah, I guess that's kind of what I wanted to do with it as well. I wanted it to make a point about we like doing that. We like being comfortable and kind of going back to our baser instincts and watching people get messed about. But, these are characters, like especially in true crime stuff and that, there's real victims somewhere and they've just become a character in a story for people. And yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that, but
No, I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And the technological part of it layers on top of that too, because now we have this sense of anonymity.
yeah, definitely.
So we can actually put people through collective, like you think of online bullying, we can put people through things collectively, anonymously, that really destroys their lives.
That's it, yeah. And we're at a point now, a very weird point, where exactly that, we can just, it takes no time at all. I can literally be drinking a cup of tea in bed and ruin someone's life just by having a horrible, pointless dig. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Or catfishing too.
Yeah.
All of this stuff. So let's talk a little bit about the characters.
Mm-hmm.
So you have 5 different people from 5 different parts of the world, and they all seem to be shaped by where they're from.
Yeah.
You touched on this a little bit with New York and Paris, but I wondered, how did you decide on these locations, and how much firsthand experience were you able to add into these, because they seem realistic to me.
Good. That's good. Yeah, they were all just places that I'd been. I'd literally been there in like the couple of years running up to it. And then I guess just from the writing point of view, being trapped in lockdown, I think we all started looking back on like our recent trips a bit. It was almost like wishful remembering when you just sit there like, I remember what it was like getting on a plane. And then I guess that kind of fed into it as well, because suddenly leaving your house and getting on a plane was quite a scary idea for a while. Like, you know, there was actually talk at one point like, wow, I don't know if this generation will ever be able to go on a plane again. So I kind of wanted that to, I guess that reflected a bit like characters go on a plane, and yeah, it's a really scary ordeal for them. Yeah, it shouldn't be. And yeah, I guess just all these different places. So New York is a good example of when I went there, considering New York City is a really like liberal place. I had a really bad time there the first time I went, like really bad, because I went with a guy who, it's a long story, it's quite really short. Again, we didn't have much money. We were kind of like doing all the low stuff, like going around the streets and stuff, just hanging out. And my friend, my British friend, was wearing like a tight polo top. And considering New York's meant to be like this amazing liberal place, everywhere we went, we were just getting like homophobic slurs thrown at us, like everywhere. Like we'd walk in a bar just in the middle of the day and people would just be yelling things that don't need repeating on a podcast, to the point where we'd have to leave, like, yeah, just because he was wearing a tight t-shirt, and he's like the straightest guy in the world as well. So I thought that was really interesting again, because then when I came back, people were telling me how amazing New York is, like, and it's so liberal and arty, and I was like, wow, I did not get that at all. And then I went back just right before the pandemic, and I actually had nice time, and it was totally different. But again, yeah, there was just all these places where I'd been, and yeah, like I said, there's just different ways you can view it. Like there's ways you can view it, like if you go with all the money to just get cabs everywhere and have a nice, you know, Sex in the City time. That's great. Like, which is what I did the second time I went, you know, going full on Carrie Bradshaw was good. But yeah, the first time just wasn't. And yeah, and they're all just places I'd been. So I also wanted the really cliched detective character who would usually be in London. I chose Luton, which is just outside London, and it's an intense town. Like it has some of the biggest crime rates in the country and stuff, for just a town. And yeah, I guess I just wanted to take those little cliches and just change them a bit, make them a bit just different.
And it's very interesting. As someone who's from New York and lives in Paris, I feel like I should apologize
No.
for the experiences that you've had. But also, I suppose it added fuel to the book. So
yeah, like I said, then I had an ace time the next time that I went. I had an amazing time. So it just depends. Like you just find yourself in a certain place at a certain time, and being a certain character, you can just be judged, I guess.
Yeah. If you're enjoying this episode of Storytime in Paris, you may enjoy our sister podcast, Life in Diasporas. Through enlightened and well-thought discussions, Life in Diasporas investigates what it means to be Black in a European country in the 21st century, looking at the different ways Black communities have formed the spaces they've made home and the new identities they've crafted in the process. Listen now to Life in Diasporas on ParisUndergroundRadio.com. Storytime in Paris will be right back after a word from our sponsors. And now, back to Storytime in Paris. Have you been to Minnesota?
Yeah, I forgot about Minnesota. Yeah, so one of my really good friends lives in St. Paul. So I went over there. Yeah, no better experiences there. I just loved it.
Okay, because that was the place to me that seemed the most surprising, like the one that stood out the most as the most as a choice. I mean, you know.
Yeah, it was literally just because my friend lived there and I absolutely loved it there. And everyone was, I think that the reason I chose it, I thought it'd work, is because they have this thing called Minnesota Nice, which maybe people listening to a French podcast won't realize this, but it's like when you go there, Minnesota Nice is almost their slogan, and everyone's just so lovely, like too suspiciously lovely. But then you also have, it's the same city with the George Floyd case, and like so there's like anywhere again, there's two sides to every place you go, and I kind of wanted that. I wanted this on the surface. There's this Minnesota nice girl, and yet she, like all the characters in it, are hiding things that aren't even necessarily bad. It's just that they are either ashamed of it or and I found that interesting in people. Everyone's kind of hiding something all over the world. It doesn't matter what language you speak or what background you have. People are their own worst judges sometimes.
Yeah, that's true. And your book is certainly about that and about the repercussions that us holding onto our secrets can cause.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm really curious. So you have these 5 characters. They all react differently. So I'm curious if you were in a similar situation, which I would never wish upon you, which character do you think you would react most like?
Oh, that is a good question. How would I react most like? It depends how tired I was, I guess. I don't know, because maybe I'd just destroy my phone and forget about it. Yeah, maybe. Um, no, I reckon I'd be on it. Yeah, I reckon I'd probably, Noah from Paris, he has a pretty rough time. He has to travel the channel without a passport, and so hats off to him. Um, oh, that is a good question. I don't know. Would you go across the world? Do you reckon? Like, if today I was like, get across the world now, would you do it?
Well, that's the thing. So, because I knew I was going to ask you this question, I was trying to think of what my answer would be too. And it's hard to know because I do think that part of me would be like, shut up, this is a stupid trick, and destroy my phone. But also, part of me would be really worried that it were true.
Yeah,
And I think then if I were convinced that it were true, I'm the kind of person who has a lot of focus in a crisis situation. So I do kind of think that I would be most like Noah, where I would just be like, all right, let's just go, whatever it takes.
that's impressive. Yeah,
Well, I mean, please don't test me.
I'm probably gonna test you. To be fair, yeah, you're
No.
you're gonna have an interesting year.
Good Lord. So this book starts out dark
Hmm.
and it gets darker.
Yep.
So, how are you able to go to such dark and gruesome places and then bring yourself back out of it afterwards? Do you have any writing rituals that you're employed to sort of separate the two spaces?
Um, just sit in a pitch black room listening to screaming heavy metal for about 2 days before I start writing. No, I don't really.
That would be
Uh,
really intense.
yeah, it would, wouldn't it? Yeah, just eat loads of mushrooms and go on a roller coaster. And that's it. No, I don't think I do. To be honest, no. I just kind of write it. Kind of like almost wrote itself once you get going with it, because it's very much like just following the characters. Like, oh, I wonder what they would do next. Very much like you just said. Like, you get to have fun with it because the opening is very much that debate of like, oh, is it real or not? But once you actually get going, and I didn't want it to be too over the top. I didn't want it to be like I said, shoving people in blenders and stuff. I wanted it to be almost mundane things, but in a really claustrophobic kind of prose. So I wanted the writing to really reflect the discomfort that they're feeling, like things just getting on a plane or meeting strangers in a room. Like, I wanted that to be the terror of it for them. Like, they never know what's coming around the corner. So yeah, I didn't have to go too dark. I think generally it's just stuff that I see in the world around me. There's no actual game, but especially with like the end and stuff, you see that in the world around you without giving it away. But it's yeah, these strange times we live in. So I didn't have to go too overboard dark in my head or anything. It's just very much looking around you and being like, yeah, that could happen.
It's true too that all of the situations, all of the, parts of the game, even if they're scary and there's, lots of it is time sensitive, it does all seem like something that any one of us could possibly have to face. None of it is like really ridiculous over the top situations.
No, yeah, and I was very conscious of that because, yeah, when I first started writing it, it could have gone that way. I could feel myself like, oh, today I'm going to have fun with these guys. And then I kept being like, oh, no, better not. Actually, my first draft, this sounds like a massive lie, so I don't really say this much. But bearing in mind, I submitted the manuscript in beginning of autumn. In my first draft, it was going to be, they were forced to play really over the top children's games. And it was going to begin with them playing red light, green light.
Oh no.
Yeah, that is genuinely what it was going to be. And I kind of sat there and I like wrote it through once and I was like, oh, no, it just don't work. Like it's too far, it's too over the top. Finished the book anyway, submitted it, and then about 2 weeks after I submitted it, Squid Game came out, and I was like, really glad that I changed my mind on that because they'd probably just been it. So
Yeah. Wow, that's funny.
yeah, it is kind of funny. It's been good though. Like, sometimes writing's a lot about luck, hitting something at the right time, and it was just complete coincidence. Like I wrote this book. I mean, death games, they've always been around and they're really big in Asian culture. There's so many shows and films that most of the Western world, don't even know about. And Squid Game managed to break that, I guess, as did, Battle Royale and stuff. But yeah, I was just kind of lucky I wrote this, and then Squid Game's become this huge phenomenon, and I guess kind of shamelessly ride on the back of it and just be like, hey, oh, if you like that, you can also check this out.
It is a good touchstone. I mean, your book isn't like it, but it is a good touchstone. It's where you can jump from one to the next, I think.
Yeah, I think so. It's just a more realistic thing.
Yeah.
I think.
So, speaking of which, I think you're going to read us a passage from this.
I'm going to give it a go.
Is there anything that we need to know contextually before you do so?
No, I don't think so. I think I'm just going to choose. So each of the characters is introduced in order, and I think I'll just choose one of the characters' introductions to make it easier. So this is chapter 5, player 5. Linda Malone should have clocked off at 7, but it's almost 9 by the time she's dealt with the trio of backpackers in departures. After 8 hours of screening a continuous herd through archway metal detectors, the last thing she needed was for these 3 delinquents with their red puffy eyes to come shuffling down the queue towards her, reeking of cannabis. They must have decided to get a head start on their trip to Amsterdam, and it's ultimately cost them their flight. What did they think had happened? Who tries to board a plane stoned? It's times like these that Linda is thankful her own daughter has always been such a level-headed girl. Alyssa would never do anything so stupid. Linda manages to unload the bewildered backpackers onto the relevant officers, and then she can finally get out of the terminal. Despite her security uniform, a black stab vest over a white shirt, she has to show her ID pass to access the staff car park. She sometimes smiles to whichever colleagues working the exit. Tonight she doesn't. She's not in the mood. Luton Airport isn't huge. In fact, its size means it's technically called an aerodrome, but it's always so busy, and Linda crawls through traffic on the exit route, silently fuming. It was crap like this that made her leave the old career behind. All that good old-fashioned family time missed out on because of work. Nights wasted, years lost. This job was supposed to be different, but this is the 4th night this week she's got out late. Through the BMW's Bluetooth, she tries to call Alyssa to see if she's already eaten. The call won't connect, which further sours Linda's mood. The signal this close to the airport is always rubbish, and her pay-as-you-go phone is ridiculously dated. She decides to pick up some frozen fare just in case, because there'll be nothing much in the house. It'd be easier to grab a takeaway, of course, but Alyssa's 17, and Linda can't keep up with her diets and mood swings. The last time Linda came home with an unplanned bucket of chicken, it had ended in a 2-day sulk. Teenagers. Linda stops at the Express Food and Wine on Lyneham Road. She does this almost every evening. It's a cramped, unremarkable shop run by a polite Bangladeshi family. There are hundreds more shops like it in Luton. This one just happens to be a few blocks away from the airport. She takes 2 frozen lasagnas from the chest freezer with the sliding doors, couples these with the cheapest bottle of red on the shelf, and pays AJ, the shopkeeper, in cash. She's already back in a car outside, about to start the engine with her purchases on the passenger seat, when the hooded figure appears some way off along the pavement. He's a scrawny man. She can see that much by the way his dark clothes hang from his frame and drapes. As he walks, he's checking the street in both directions. Suspicious. Somehow, he doesn't seem to have spotted Linda in the shadow of a car's interior. He's bouncing a little, like a boxer psyching himself up outside the ring. There's something in his right hand, something that catches the yellow glow of the nearest streetlight. It's a knife. Great. Linda watches in silence as the man barges into the shop, almost taking the door off its hinges. At first, her heart rate barely quickens. For as long as she can remember, she's been trained for this sort of thing. She dials 999 and reports the armed robbery without fanfare, then hangs up and fingers the key in the ignition. It's been a long day. Too long. She doesn't need this. She's 51 years old, for God's sake. It's not a place to get involved. Alyssa's waiting at home. Think about Alyssa. Overhead, a plane ascends from the single runway at the airport, lights blinking, engine roaring. It rattles the car. There's nobody else on the dark street. Nothing in the windows of the surrounding houses except for muted lights behind drawn curtains, the soft strobing of televisions. Linda remains behind the steering wheel. There's a cash machine embedded in the shop's outer wall, which leaves only a narrow strip of window overlooking the counter, but she can see the story well enough from here. The hooded man has overturned the display case full of scratch cards. It looks as if he's still holding the knife with one hand while he stuffs entire rolls of scratch cards into his holder. The shopkeeper, AJ, appears to be unharmed. That's good. The till's wide open, empty by now. AJ is hastily throwing packets of cigarettes into the hooded man's bag. Linda shakes her head. Cigarettes are more expensive than ever. 50 packets might make this idiot another few £100, but he's wasting precious minutes. They're less than a mile from the airport. The sirens will be here soon, and this has got nothing to do with her. Go home to Alyssa. Cook supper, catch up on the soaps, and be a mum. She examines the bottle she just purchased. Like every wine in the Express, it's sealed with a screw top. She opens it and takes a mouthful. Malt vinegars have tasted better. The nerves are stirring now, a million jolts of electricity crackling beneath her skin. She's starting to feel sick, in a thrilling sort of way. Looking back to the shop, it seems like the thief is finishing up. He's zipping the holder. No flashing lights, though. He's gonna get away with it. Linda stamps one shoe in the footwell. He's gonna get away with it. Sod it, she says, screwing the lid back onto the bottle. She climbs out of the car, quietly closing the door behind her, and carries the wine by the neck at the side. There's a crash inside the shop. Linda can't be sure, but it sounds like the man has just toppled the centre aisle on his way out. With her empty palm, she presses the thickness of her stab vest to make sure it's still there. She can almost feel her pulse pressing back now, which is surely impossible, but she isn't scared. She's too excited to be scared. The door to the Express Food and Wine opens inwards. The bell jingles pleasantly. The thief comes bursting out, head first into the arc of Linda's double-handed cricket bat swing. The bottle explodes on impact. The guy hits the pavement hard. Linda kicks his knife away as cheap vino runs into the gutter. It's another few seconds before the car comes around the corner, sirens flashing. First opposite to jump out of the car is pulling a bright yellow taser. You, he screams, stay where you are. Linda checks her watch. 6 minutes, she says calmly. What took you so long? The officer hesitates, squints. He holsters his taser, shaking his head. For Christ's sake, Malone, what are you done? She looks down at the hooded heap and shrugs. Above them, another plane roars into the darkness.
Does French culture sometimes leave you scratching your head? Well, you might enjoy listening to our sister podcast, Navigating the French, hosted by journalist Emily Monaco. Each episode focuses on a different word in the French language, and Emily is joined by an expert who will help explore what that word says about French culture. Listen now to Navigating the French on ParisUndergroundRadio.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll be right back with Storytime in Paris after a word from our sponsors. And now, back to Storytime in Paris. Fabulous. Thank you so much.
That's all right.
That was a great chapter choice, too, by the way.
Yeah, well, I chose one with the least amount of dialogue, so I didn't have to put an accent on. That was the idea. Yeah.
So what's next for you? Are you working on a second novel by any chance?
I am, yeah. Yes, I was very lucky that it's a 2-book deal, so I am now writing another unrelated thriller. Yeah. So I just started this month, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be pretty dark, though.
That doesn't surprise me.
No, yeah. I reckon it's going to be good, though.
So if people want to keep up with what you're doing and find your books, where can they find you?
They can find me on Twitter. I'm on Twitter. I'm not very good at it, but I am on Twitter. And it's Mr. Scott Kershaw is my handle, because just Scott Kershaw was taken by a photographer in London, apparently.
Oh.
So regularly this poor guy gets tags like, loved your book, Scott Kershaw, and I reckon he hates me. So yeah, I am at Mr. Scott Kershaw on Twitter and Instagram, and you can find me bopping around there and, come say hello. I'm a pretty nice guy.
Thank you so much. This is really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, honestly. Cheers.
Thank you again to Scott Kershaw for such an interesting conversation. You can find Scott on Instagram and Twitter at Mr. Scott Kershaw. Please join me next week when my guest will be author and podcast host Zutanya Dakers. Check back next week to see if your questions have been answered and to hear a reading from her book, Dinner for One: How Cooking in Paris Saved Me. If you'd like to keep the conversation going, please join the Storytime in Paris book club, where you'll meet a different guest author each month and get to speak with them directly about their work. For more information, please visit patreon.com/Paris Underground Radio. I'm your host, Jennifer Garrity, and you can find me on all socials at Jennyforia. That's JennyPhoria, and on my website, jennyforia.com. Storytime in Paris is produced by me as part of the Paris Underground Radio Podcast Network. To check out interviews with previous guests or to discover more great Paris-based podcasts, please visit parisundergroundradio.com. Thank you, and until next time, happy reading! This episode of Storytime in Paris was produced by Jennifer Garrity for Paris Underground Radio. For more on this show and shows like it, please visit parisundergroundradio.com.